Yeah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nהיה bidvarei.
Amen.
L'chaim, l'chaim l'bracha. Good tavach, everybody. Shavua tov. A wonderful, good week. And of course, starting a good week, we start with the Torah portion. The Torah portion that gives life. So let us begin. It's human nature that we all want to feel good about ourselves. And that, of course, drives us often to do good as a result. But what is true generosity? What is the true motivation in being generous? How do we see ourselves in the act of giving? What's our place in the act of giving? Giving doesn't mean just money, but of course it means money. It means your time. It means your wisdom. It means your loving devotion. Whatever it is, how do we feel about what is it true generosity? What happens when we're compelled to give? In other words, you might say, it's not really coming from my heart because I have to give. Is that have true value? Is that true generosity? Some might even say it's unfair. What do you mean I'm compelled to give? How do we understand that? All right, so that's something that we'll come out with at the end of the class. Our class is, as we've learned, is based on Rashi, a verse in the Torah that Rashi comments on. And from there, we go through the pilpul, we go through the discussion, the debate, to understand what Rashi is saying. What is he coming to answer? What's his problem? And so on. So let us begin. We're going to start off with a couple of rules of Rashi to remind ourselves. We've done many rules on Rashi. All right. Beautiful. Okay. So Rashi usually separates different points into distinct comments, each with its own heading. As a matter of fact, we had that in today's Chumash Rashi. Hold on, let me actually get that example out over here. Give me a second. We're in Parshas Emor. So on the very first Rashi, we're in chapter 21, verse 1, in the book of Leviticus of Vayikra. So it says, and God spoke to Moses, say to the priests of the sons of Aaron, right? So on the words of the sons of Aaron, Bnei Aaron, right? On the words Bnei Aaron, Rashi gives no less than 3 different explanations. And in each one, he brings down the words Bnei Aaron, gives an explanation. He gives the words again, Bnei Aaron. He gives a different explanation of what those words, the sons of Aaron, what it means. And the third time he brings down the same words, Bnei Aaron, right? And he gives a third explanation, right? Each one being different. So when there's a distinct comment, it might be on the same words, but it's a distinct comment. So then Rashi would bring down when he will separate them, right, into its own heading. And second rule in Rashi is Rashi does not typically cite the teachings authors or author in his comments. And when he does, that's of course to teach us something. All right. So we're going to go straight into the middle of this week's Torah portion. Here we go. I have it in front of you. Okay. So from chapters 23, starts from verse 4. These are the appointed holidays, holy occasions you shall designate in their appointed time. Right? By the way, these are the words that we make for the daytime kiddush. Right? These are the words. These words in verse 4 is the daytime kiddush on a holiday. Right? So in the first month, on the 14th of the month, in the afternoon, you shall sacrifice the Passover offering to God. Right? And on the 15th day of the month, the festival of unleavened cakes to God, you shall eat unleavened cakes for the 7-day period. On the first day, you shall be a holy occasion for you, and you shall not perform any work of labor. And you shall bring a fire offering to God for the 7-day period. On the seventh day, it shall be a holy occasion, and you shall not perform any work of labor. Okay. Now, so that's the first holiday. The first holiday of the year is Pesach, right? First month of the year, first holiday of the year. Then we go down the calendar, and then we come to the mitzvah of the Omer offering in verse number 9. And God spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when they come to the land which I'm giving you, and you reap its harvest, and you shall bring to the Kohen an Omer at the beginning of your reaping. And from the morrow of the rest day, from the day you bring the Omer as a wave offering, you shall count for yourself 7 weeks. They shall be complete weeks, 7 weeks, 7 days, 749 days. We're in the middle of the Omer. Last night we counted the 28th day of the Omer, right? This is based on the offering of the Omer. That's where it's coming, the following day, right? So the following day of the first day of Pesach, that night, we count the Omer. You shall count until the day after the 7th week, namely the 50th day, on which you shall bring a new meal offering to God. So here we're speaking about the holidays, and in the holidays, we're now speaking about the next holiday after 7 weeks, right? Which is, of course, Shavuos, the holiday of Shavuos, and associated with it, it has its offerings, right? From your dwelling places, you shall bring bread, set aside 2 loaves made from 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour, and they shall be baked, leavened, the first offering to God. And associated with the bread, you shall bring 7 unblemished lambs in their first year, 1 young bull, 2 rams. These shall be a burnt offering to God, along with the meal offering and libations, a fire offering with the spirit of satisfaction to God. And you shall offer up 1 he-goat as a sin offering and 2 lambs in their first year of peace offering. So, very good. Fine. Right? Actually, it continues. And the Kohen shall wave them in conjunction with the first offering bread as a waving before God, along with the 2 lambs. They shall be holy to God and belong to the Kohen. And you shall designate, and you shall designate on this very day a holy occasion. It shall be for you. You shall not perform any work of labor. There's an eternal statute in all of your dwelling places throughout your generations. Right. So at the conclusion of Shavuos, right? That was the holiday of Shavuos. So Pesach, we have the Omer offering, right? And the unique Omer offering. Shavuos, we have the 2 breads, and the 2 breads here are leavened breads. It's, the only time in the year that something that is not kosher for Passover is brought. The barley is unleavened, right? And now, after Shavuos, we have the next verses of the Torah. And the Torah shifts the focus to seemingly two unrelated mitzvahs. These are the next verses in the Torah of this week's parsha. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly remove the corner of your field during your harvesting. You shall not gather up the gleanings of your harvest. Rather, you shall leave these for the poor person and for the stranger. I am God. Okay. Make note of this. Then the Torah continues. And guess what it continues? And God spoke to Moses saying, what do you think he spoke about? The next holiday, right? Because Parshas Emor speaks about, is one of the major places of the holidays, and particularly the offerings that are on the holidays, right? So verse 24, speak to the children of Israel, saying the seventh month, which is, of course, Tishrei, right? On the first day of the month, which is Rosh Hashanah, shall be a Sabbath for you, a remembrance of Israel through the shofar blast of the holy occasion, right? That's what we do, blow the shofar. You shall not perform any work of labor, and you shall offer up a fire offering to God. And God spoke to Moses, saying, but on the 10th day of the seventh month, it is a day of atonement. It shall be a holy occasion for you, and you shall afflict yourselves, which means fasting, and you shall offer up a fire offering to God. Right? And we continue because we still have another major holiday. And God spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying, the 15th day of the seventh month is the festival of Sukkot, a 7-day period up to God. These are God's appointed holy days, and they shall designate them as holy occasions on which you offer a fire offering to God, burnt offering, a meal offering, sacrifice, and libations, and a requirement of each day on its day. Okay. So, what is an obvious question that Rashi would come to deal with over here? Told you to make note of it. What? What's the obvious question? That's not so obvious, I guess. What happened to my thing here? I can't. Oh, here it is. Okay.
No
So,
idea who brings
what?
what? Who brings what?
Who raised what?
No, who brings what? And in all of these enumerations, it's probably not each individual or each family, or I don't know.
No, these are yeah, no, these are holiday offerings that are the Kohanim that they do in the sanctuary. So, but that's not the question.
He talks about Shabbos in between the holidays that he's describing.
No, he didn't speak about Shabbos.
No.
He called no. Shabbos wasn't mentioned. Anybody?
Why are those two verses placed right in the middle, speaking about like leaving,
Right.
like the cleaning stuff you harvest for the poor?
Thank you. Exactly. Why are those two verses that speak about Peah? Peah is like payas. You heard payas, right? Sidelocks. Payas means corners. Corners of the field that are left for the poor. And shicha, which are the forgotten gleanings when you harvest your field, that they have to be left for the poor. How did they get mixed in over there? Like, did the editor make an oversight? Heaven forfend. Because the editor's God Almighty, so so what's going on over here? Right? Let's see Rashi. Let's see Rashi. Let's see if he's bothered like you are.
The simplifier.
Okay. Placement of the mitzvah of Lekid and Peah amid the discussion of the festivals seems strange. So Rashi, on this verse, "Ubekurtzachem," when you reap. Scripture repeats this once again, so that one who disobeys transgresses two negative commandments. Rabbi Avdimus, the son of Rabbi Yosef, says, why does Scripture place this passage in the middle of laws regarding the festivals, with Passover and Shavuos on one side and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot on the other side? To teach you that whoever gives a leket, gleanings, shichacha, forgotten sheaves, and peah, the corners of the field, to the poor in the appropriate manner, is deemed as if he has built the holy temple and offered up his sacrifices within it. So let's take apart Rashi over here. Rashi seems to be addressing two questions. Question number one, why does the Torah repeat these two mitzvahs here if they've already been stated earlier? In Parshas Kedoshim last week, if you recall, last week we had this mitzvah, right? Here it is, last week's Torah portion. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not fully reap the corner of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. And you shall not glean your vineyard, nor shall you collect the fallen individual grapes of your vineyard. And you shall leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I am God. Wow. Pretty similar, huh? What's question number two? Why are these mitzvahs particularly placed here in this discussion of the festivals, right? They seem to be completely out of place, right? To which Rashi answers. He says a repetition, right, is to increase on the prohibitions, lavin in Hebrew, that's associated with the mitzvah. In other words, by reinstating them in a separate context, the Torah is expanding the scope of the prohibition. It's giving more punch to this, right? In other words, hey, you gotta be careful with this mitzvah of keeping the corners of your field, the gleanings, and the leftover sheaves, right?
The seriousness.
Huh? The seriousness, exactly. And answer number two is to teach us that giving to the poor is equivalent to bringing sacrifices in the temple on the festivals. Clear? We're good? Yeah? We're good. Okay. So if we're good, so we finished.
No.
Oh, so you're not so good.
No,
No, why, Andrew, come on. You're a good guy. What do you mean? You're not so good?
no, I don't. It looks like Rashi's making an emphasis on two negative mitzvahs. I don't know if
Well, they're not
I know-
negative. They're not negative. They're very positive mitzvahs because they're
Well,
about the poor, right?
yeah.
That's what the mitzvah is. It's about giving to the poor, right?
So does he do that? He does two positives and one.
What he's saying is he's saying two things, right? He's saying that this mitzvah is repeated. Remember, it was in last week's parsha. This is here, right in front of you. You see that those are words from last week, not this week. It's repeated this week. You know, not exactly word for word, but the mitzvahs are there the same way, right? So that itself is a question, right? So what does he say? The reason for that is to give more punch to this mitzvah, right? And to increase in its value and importance of how important that you must do this mitzvah. Furthermore, right, it's placed over here to give to the poor is the equivalent of bringing a sacrifice on the altar in the temple, right? So, but that's right. Let's go back to Rashi over here, right? This is Rashi, okay? But we have two questions on Rashi, right? First is, he's giving two distinct explanations here, right? One is to give more punch, and one is because in the placement of where it is between the holidays, and that's not because of the punch, because of between the holidays, right? So if that's the case, it's two different explanations. He should give two different headings. As I mentioned to you from this week's Torah, at the beginning of this week's Torah portion, right? The Bnei Aaron, the children of Aaron. So the last explanation of Rashi is the children and not the daughters, right? Before that, he says the children of Aaron and not those who have are not fitting for the service, right? And so on. Each one is a different explanation. So he does it under a different heading. Like here, you see over here it says, when you reap, that's taking from the verse. And that's what he's explaining from the verse, right? So he should have said, when you reap once, to tell us, to give us that if you disobey, transgression, two negative commandments, more punch to this, right? And then when you reap, Avudramas, the son of Rabbi Yosef, why is this passage placed here, right? Because it's a second explanation. So it should be separated. That's the first question. Second question is, as we know, when you bring down the name of the author of who said this, in Rashi explaining the simple meaning, what does that have to do with the simple meaning? The fact that he mentions his name must mean that it's adding something to the explanation by knowing who the author is. Because remember, Rashi is coming to explain the simple meaning of the text. The simple meaning of the text has nothing to do who authored the statement, right? It's got to do with the words, what they mean, independent of the author. And Rashi's not here to teach us, who the author is. He's to teach us a simple meaning. Once he says the name of the author, it must mean he's giving something more of a depth here that, that's not an obvious thing, right? By knowing who this author is, it'll also give us deeper appreciation for what the author is saying, okay? It's adding something, in other words, okay? Are we good? Okay. All right. So sometimes when we hone in on something, as we've mentioned, sometimes, you get very, looking at a detail of something, you need to zoom out and be able to see the context of things. And then sometimes things have clarity. So let us understand over here. These two mitzvahs, the fact that they are here when you zoom out, may not be so challenging. Why? What's the context over here? We're speaking about the holidays. And in the holidays, we're speaking about grain-related offerings that you need to bring, right? In the context of the grain-related holidays, so the barley on Pesach, and then the two shtei alechem, the two loaves on Shavuos, right? In that context, then the grain-related mitzvahs of leket and peah kind of fit in because they're grain-related, the corners of your field, right? Your leftover gleanings, right? Your sheaves that you have forgotten. In other words, like it's the Torah like saying, here you've got these offerings that you need to bring on these 2 holidays. Oh, don't think it's over. There's other grain-related mitzvahs that you need to fulfill. Right? So in that context, that there's other grain-related mitzvahs that you need to fulfill, then it's perfectly reasonable. Right? Except for one problem we have then. What would that problem be?
It is not chronological.
It's not chronological, that's true, but that's not what Rashi's problem would be, because, in other words, Torah is not chronological. We know that already. It doesn't need to be chronological. So, in other words, there's a theme here. The theme is offerings that you need to give by the holidays, but don't think that that's sufficient to give those offerings. You also have to give these offerings to the poor, right? So in that manner, there's some kind of theme. Okay, if that's the question, then what becomes the problem based on that understanding? No? We still have a problem. What's our problem? Gotcha. Come on.
Well, I just have an issue figuring out why is it placed in between those holidays right there, not like at the beginning of Passover Shower where it speaks about grains, because the other ones don't have grains necessarily in itself. Like, why is it in the middle of these holidays? Like right
Well,
at that specific place.
because the other ones don't speak about grain, and this one does.
Yeah.
So then it is a kind of a logical place to put it then, right? If we're speaking about that, those are offerings that we need to make, right? So don't think that when it comes to grain-related mitzvahs that you are complete when it comes to doing those offerings. You also have these. So that's okay, but we have another problem. The problem is very simple. But we already learned this mitzvah. Why are you repeating it? In other words, thematically it can fit in, but we know the mitzvah. You told us last week this mitzvah. That doesn't make sense, right? The repetition. So that's now where Rashi comes and says the Rebbe in this week's Sicha. Oops. There we go. The verse, when you reap the harvest, appears here in the festival section rather than the section specifically dedicated to these mitzvahs. According to the simple reading of the text, which is Rashi's approach, this isn't the question at all. On a plain level, the placement follows naturally from the mitzvahs mentioned earlier in the section that are associated with the harvesting grain. Torah first says, when you come to the land, you will harvest its crops. You shall bring an omer offering. Then it commands that a new grain offering be brought on Shavuos, made out of wheat, following the progression. Torah now introduces another mitzvah of harvesting grain, right? Primary addresses why Torah repeats the mitzvah of Leken and pay a second time after they were already commanded in Parshas Kedeshim. In other words, the fact that it's in that order, that's okay. But why is it repeated? That's not okay, right? Others, that's the issue. Is that clear?
Yeah, but the question remains what?
Is that, I want to make sure everybody's clear. Is that clear? No? we can understand if we just look at this parsha, right? Torah is giving us obligations that when it comes to the season of the holiday and the grain that you have mitzvahs to do with, right? Pesach, you have the barley offering, and Shavuos, you have the two loaves, right? Okay, so now Torah is coming and say, well, but okay, at the same time, don't think you're finished with that. You also have mitzvahs that are related to grain, the corner of your fields, your gleanings and your forgotten sheaves, that those also you have to, right? In that theme, there's a connection, right? Right. But the problem is, then what Rashi is coming first to address, if that's the case, then why is it being repeated? Oh, that's his first answer. Why is it becoming repeated? To add more of a punch. That makes sense now, right? Oh, okay. Add more of a punch. That's why it's being, okay. But to add more of a punch, right? Why is it being repeated here of all places? Even though thematically it connects, right? But that's not sufficient of a reason to place it here. Just because thematically right? So the fact that it's repeated is to give more of a punch. In other words, there's two prohibitions you're doing here when you do not leave the corners of your field and so on, right? Got it. But why specifically here? Oh, specifically here? Because, in other words, specifically here between the festivals, right? Why is it specifically here between the festivals? That becomes then the question, because that's where it is, right over here with the festivals and the offerings, the sacrifices that are brought, right? Let us continue with that. So continuing with the Rebbe's teachings, it's precisely after Rashi's explanation that the real question arises. Why did the Torah place these mitzvahs in the middle of the festivals? In other words, the fact that it's mentioned twice, that we understand is to make it more of a stronger prohibition, more emphasis. But it could have been added anywhere, even thematically. Even though it fits here thematically, it doesn't have to be over here. It could be elsewhere, right? In other words, if it was only one time that it was mentioned and it was put here thematically, fine, that's okay. But if it's already been mentioned and we know the mitzvah, it's not enough to be here thematically, right? So why is it mentioned twice? Well, that's the first reason he gave, in order to give greater punch, that more emphasis to this mitzvah, right? Continues Rashi, and he says, then why did the Torah place the mitzvahs be in the middle of the festival specifically? In our case, the verse appears not just among other mitzvahs related to the harvest, but rather within this section primarily focused on the sacrifices of the festivals. Proof of this is the Torah lists it in between Pesach and Shavuos on one side, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur on the other side. And these latter holidays have no connection with the grain harvest at all. This suggests the entire section is fundamentally about the sacrifices of the festivals. Initially, our attitude was there's something thematic because the first two festivals have about grain, but the other ones have nothing to do with grain. So then it cannot be thematically that it right. The fact that it's in between the two must be that the thematic connection is not the grain, but it's the offerings. Because on both sides of the coin, right, they're all about offerings. Even the grain are also offerings for the holidays, right? So the entire section fundamentally about the sacrifices of the festival. So how does repeating the fact the prohibition of leken and peah fit in the discussion of the festival offerings? It's not a festival offering, so how does it fit in? Brought on Shavuos, made from wheat, following the progression of the Torah, now introduces another mitzvah related to harvesting. Oops, sorry. Yeah. That's why Rashi doesn't stop here. Remember, we had a question that Rashi brings the two explanations under the same Divrei Maskil, commenting on the same word, right? Even though they're two separate explanations. No, they're not two separate explanations. One explanation creates the question for the second. The fact that it is, the first explanation is what? Is that it's giving more punch, right? It's second time it's mentioned to make it a stronger prohibition. Well, if that's the case, then why is it here? That's why he needs the second explanation of why is it here between the holidays and their sacrifice. This is to teach you that when you give to the poor, it's as if you brought a sacrifice, as if you built a temple and brought a sacrifice. Therefore,
He's drawing it.
deliberately where it is. That what's important over here, it's deliberate. Sorry, Yannick, yes, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just going to say, so he's drawing an equivalent. He's making it an equivalent.
Not sure what you mean by an equivalence.
Well, it's an equivalent to bringing a sacrifice. It has the
Yeah,
same
that's
value.
right. Well, Rashi said that. Rashi said that.
Same value.
That was clear from Rashi, right? Rashi clearly said in his second explanation, why is it between the holidays of Pesach and Shavuos and Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, is to let us know that that giving to the poor, which these are mitzvahs to give to the poor, right, is equal to building the holy temple and bringing an offering on the altar, which is pretty strong, right? But the point is over here, one explanation leads to the second explanation, right? The first explanation is, why is it being and others? So Rashi's real issue over here is his first issue. Why is it being repeated? Stronger punch. This is a serious mitzvah, right? You got to take care of the poor. It's serious. So it's being repeated. Oh, okay. Then why here? Why between the holidays and their offerings? Oh, that's to tell you that if you take care of the poor, then it's as if you built the holy temple and brought an offering on the altar, like all these are offerings that we're speaking about. That's the connection between them, right? We first wanted to make a thematic connection with grain offering. That was the first, right? And then culminating with the grain offerings that you give to the poor. No. And when we look at it that way, okay, but then we have a question, why is it repeated? Oh, give it more seriousness. Oh, if it's more seriousness, then the real connection is not really about the grain offering, that to put it over here, it's got to be more of a purpose of why it's here specifically, right? Between the two. Because what is really between all the festivals is offerings. Every festival has offerings. Not every festival has grain. Specific grain mitzvahs, right? Grain offering mitzvahs. But offerings they do have. That's the equivalence between all of them. And this is in the middle of it. Oh, you mean this is also an offering? Well, what kind of offering is it when you give to the poor? Oh, it's as if you did it. As if you built the holy temple and brought an offering on the altar when you take care of the poor. That's what's. That's what Rashi's saying. Okay. We're good? Yeah?
I find it fascinating. This is so out of context, probably, but I find it fascinating that these instructions and commentaries had to be there because the people couldn't figure this out themselves. It's like you just don't do for people at certain times. You always do for people. I'm wrestling with this concept of that everyone had to be told all the time to do things that seemingly might have been a natural thing to think about.
Oh, thank you for saying that. We're going to get there. Hold on to that.
I'll hold on to that.
Hold on. Excellent. Excellent. Hold on to that.
I've been holding on to that for a couple of days now.
Okay. Hold on. We're going to get there. Okay. So what's interesting is coming out over here. What's coming out over here is giving this way, particularly this way, right? The Peya Leket Shicha is like offering an offering on the altar, right? But there's many ways to give, right? You can give hard cash. You can give, a nice bowl of, warm soup on a winter day to someone who's in need, and with a sandwich, right? You can give of your time to people who need. There's a lot of ways of being charitable, right? Being generous. As a matter of fact, when we learned Tanya, and we just learned this in chapter 37, maybe just like a month ago. Let's go there. Our sages spoke highly of the mitzvah of charity, saying it is equal to all the mitzvahs combined. The reason is that tzedakah is the ultimate mitzvah of action, surpassing all others. Every mitzvah serves to elevate the animal soul to Hashem. No mitzvah accomplishes this as completely as tzedakah, as charity. With most mitzvahs, only one aspect of the person's vital energy is engaged, and only at a moment of performing the mitzvah. But when a person gives charity from their earnings, they are offering God the sum total of their effort. Every ounce of their strength and time invested in earning that money is now elevated in a single act of giving. Even someone who didn't personally toil for money is still giving away something that he could have sustained his own physical life. By parting with it for the sake of the mitzvah, they are in a real way offering their very life to God. Okay. Yet there's a difference between a regular act of tzedakah and the mitzvahs that we're talking about here, the corners of your field, the gleanings that shicha means you forgot them, a certain amount, right? And leket, certain gleanings, right? There's a difference between that and me taking out a $10 bill and giving to someone who needs, or to giving them a bowl of soup, or offering my time and energy to help someone, whatever the case may be. And what is the difference? Is that I choose to who I want to give the money to. I choose how much I want to give, when I want to give it, how I want to give it. It's my discretion, right? My mindfulness and involvement, it begins with me. in a sense, ends with me. It's all about me in my generosity of giving. If I'm in a good mood, maybe I'll give more. If I'm not such a good mood, maybe I'll give less, right? Whatever. Sometimes it can be the opposite. Maybe you're in a lousy mood, and then you think, oh, I want to get in a good mood. I better give. Right? The point is, it all stems from me, right? Which is not what we're talking about at all. When you leave the corners of your field, right, you have no choice on who's going to take it. Whoever's poor and wants to come in and take, they have the right. You don't even have the right of what we call tevas hana, the pleasure of who to give it to. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the poor, and they take it as they wish, right? So there's no personal discretion here. And that's why this is a true offering. This is a true offering, right? As given to God. Because there's no me involved over here. It's only about the recipient that they get. Not even my feeling. When you give over that hot soup and the sandwich, you feel, you have nachas in yourself. Look how good I am, you feel, right? Look what I just did. And it inspires you to do more of that, which is wonderful. That's not a bad thing, obviously. It's a good thing. But it's not true generosity.
The Shemitah year seems the same thing. The Shemitah year.
Shemitah year also, because it doesn't belong to you.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Right? That's why the gifts of the poor is considered like the offering of a sacrifice. Because offering of a sacrifice is because Torah obliged you to bring that sacrifice. If you're obliged to bring the sacrifice, you're obliged. Right? You got to do what you're obliged. You left the corners of your field. Now, obviously, you could be transgressing the law, and the Torah gives a punch to that, right? So it mentions it twice to make it very stringent, this law. Absolutely. Of course, you can transgress, but we're not talking about it in the transgression. We're talking about in the fulfillment of it, that there's something unique over here. I'm just doing what God wants to take care of the poor, that they get, right? So there's no my discretion over here. There's no my, so, and that is similar, right? Of the, well, let's see from the Rebbe. The Rebbe's let's see in the Rebbe's words. In there.
Yeah, this. Scroll on the left side of the page. Those small tabs, small figures. Yeah, there. Yes.
Okay. So Rebbe says, with regular charity, it's possible that the money a person donates was earned without much effort, perhaps through an easy business deal or an inheritance, and even by chance. The significance of the act lies in the fact that since this money could have been used to sustain his own life, giving it away is considered as if he offered his very life. But when one comes to the grain he gives away as payah, and leket, it's different. This is something that came through hard labor. He plowed, planted, watered, and harvested, and in all fulfillment of the decree by the sweat of your brow, and you shall eat bread. That's why Badima's teaching the Torah's Kahanim says giving these gifts is considered as if the temple still stood and the person offered the sacrifice inside it. Applies primarily to the agricultural gifts rather than the ordinary charity. Right. Again, ordinary charity, I choose the recipient. Ordinary charity, right? I choose how much, when I want to give it. But here, lekempeya, the landowner has no say of who receives the grain, right? So Rambam says these gives the poor no personal benefit to the owner. The poor come and take the grains against the owner's will. This makes it a pure act of giving. You work so hard. It's your field that you actually plowed, you actually seeded, you did everything for it, right? Yes, you worked. Not like tzedakah. You made a windfall, right? You made a windfall. You invested well, and now you have a lot to give. You didn't work hard for that. Okay, it's wonderful give. No one's complaining about the gift, and it's wonderful. And we thank you all for the gifts that you give to Chabad. Thank you. But where is it a real sacrifice? Where is it where you really gave of yourself when your whole self was in doing it, and in giving it, your whole self isn't there because you can't even choose who you to give it to. You don't even have that pleasure. You can't even feel good about giving. In other words, like feel good because, from your hand to that person you gave. Wow. Is that ever powerful?
Rabbi, isn't that the animal soul making you feel good?
Yes, absolutely. An animal soul can't be part of a mitzvah? It could. All right. Well, you can't give with your animal soul? Yeah. And you might be doing that. It's still a mitzvah. If you gave a hungry person money
Yes.
to buy lunch, right? You gave the poor family food for Shabbos. Did you do a mitzvah? Did you? Are you feeling really great about yourself? Is it still a mitzvah? Absolutely. Still a mitzvah. How come? Because you did what God said. Give charity. The fact it wasn't complete. The point is the fullness of the mitzvah. This is the example of where it's so much not about you, it's about the recipient. So yes, even in giving charity, ideally, when it's giving money or whatever it is, giving something that you could feel good about yourself, but you don't do it to feel good about yourself. But not necessarily it will be in that instance. But with the the gleanings, the leaving the corners, right? Yes. But says the Rebbe, okay, sounds great. Real sacrifice here, right? And again, what's the sacrifice? I worked so hard. I put myself, my blood, sweat, and tears into my field. And now in the giving away, there's no me there even. That's
It's more selfless.
That's called sacrifice. That's why it's called building the temple and giving an offering. That's why it's in between them, right? We get it now, right? We're good? Yeah, folks? So we have one question left to answer. Anybody? Why do we have to know that it's Rabbi Avadimas? What does he add over here? Says the Rebbe, you can still have a little pushback over here on what we just learned. At the end of the day, if I give $1,000 to tzedakah, that's sizable. That's a half decent giving. So, especially if you have to give 10% of your net earnings, that's not even 10% of your net earnings. No one's earning $10,000, right? So that's nice. That's pretty good. And you might say, pretty, sacrifice in some way, right? In the end, what are we talking about here? The corners of the field and the few stalks of grain, that's really like a sacrifice on the altar. It's not it's not $1,000, that a person's giving, right? That's why we need to know, and Rashi quotes Rav Avardimas, because Rav Avardimas is known for championing, to be a champion of the idea of being charitable by giving thoughtfully. In other words, prioritize your giving, right? Give to the local poor. As a matter of fact, when Talmud tells us a story of him that his father said to answer a question of two individuals who were hiding in a cave for 3 days because they wanted to find out the reason why one town's needs takes precedence over another town's needs. So they came to Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi turned to his son and he said to Avidimas, answer them. Why does one town's needs take precedence over another? So he said, because the verse says, the 6 cities shall be, each town shall live, and only afterwards the surrounding areas. In other words, from that verse, he gets the notion of that you have to give life to the town and then the surrounding areas afterwards. So in other words, to prioritize in your giving, there is, is the way to give. And here, what are we saying? Rav Adimas now is coming to say, why is it between over here? Because yes, we should naturally we should prioritize, right? But he comes here that ultimately there's something even that's greater in giving, and that is about the recipient, that they get what they need. In other words, what he's coming to say over here, that normally he would say giving, prioritize, and give to those that you have more of a responsibility. So so in other words, in the act of you giving. But now he comes and says a greater thing, that greater than that, to be a real sacrifice, a real offering to God, is that when it's not about you making a prioritizing who should get first, who should get second, who should get third, that it's not about you and your prioritizing. Whoever needs, you give. And therefore, he's hinting to it through him, right? In other words, when you prioritize, again, you're making about what's important to you, perhaps. And there's a place for that in halacha. There is a place for that. At the same time, ultimate giving is about giving for what the need is, right? Why? Because that's where you become more refined as an individual, through your giving. So for example, Talmud tells us the following, that if you encounter a friend whose animal has collapsed under its load, right? And it's necessary to unload the burden of that animal, right? And you encounter another fellow Jew who's your enemy, right? Same thing happened to his animal. He needs an assistance actually to load the animal, right? The first one is to unload the burden, right? Two of them are happening at the same time. Who are you going to go help? Obviously, your friend. Torah says no. Help your enemy first. You're Jewish, not a non-Jew. Only for a Jew. This is a mitzvah for a fellow Jew, right? As last week's Torah portion, right? Not to take revenge on your fellow Jew, not to hold a grudge. And they have to love your fellow Jew as yourself. So here, You have to help your enemy first. And as the Rambam explains, because through this you refine yourself, you become selfless in your giving. That in your giving, it's not about you, it's about the need. And here, the Torah is giving us that opportunity, right? Today's Mother's Day. So Baruch Hashem, I have a mother. Thank God. So I can give, right? So it will be Father's Day. So you've heard this from me before. What do you give to a father that has everything? He has every toy, he has every power tool. So what could you give him, right? What could you give to your father in heaven? He needs your money. The money's his. The money's his. Everything's his. What does he need? The only thing he doesn't, huh?
Mitzvah.
Right? But something he doesn't have is my darkness. That I could put my darkness, my ego, my desire to feel good, and put that on the altar of God and give that to him. That I don't do it to feel good even in the mitzvah that I do. That's a gift to God. That's a true gift, right? That's true giving. It's not about me. It's what I'm needed for. That you need this from God from me. It doesn't matter about me. It really doesn't matter, right? That when we recognize that, and any natural traits that we have, any autopilot that we live with, we're going to break those natural tendencies. Our natural tendency is to do good because it feels good. That's a natural tendency. Do good because it's the godly thing, and that's what God needs from you. It's a beautiful story. I told this story over before. It's actually a friend of mine, Rabbi Zaltzman. He's a Chabad Shliach in Toronto. It's about his grandfather. During the war, he was in Samarkand. Samarkand is there's a whole book called Samarkand. You got to get it, read it, by Hillel Zaltzman. Is the son of Avram Zaltzman. So during the war, a lot of Polish refugees came from Poland during the war to seek refuge in Russia, right? And they got in Samarkand. Samarkand is in Georgia.
Uzbekistan.
Uzbekistan. Oh yeah, right, Uzbekistan. Okay. And there's a lot of Chabadniks over there, community, and okay, so it was before Pesach, and a family came, and a man came with a few young children, his wife and a few young children, and he came with nothing, fleeing from Poland from the Nazis, right? So Avram, he managed to, before Pesach, to get a loan from someone of 3,000 ruble. I think it was 3,000 if I remember correctly, to make Pesach. And he sees and the guy asks him, "Where can I get help? Where is he? Like, I know no one here, and direct me, help me out." He took out the 3,000 ruble that he just borrowed that day, and he gave the whole $3,000 rubles to him. He didn't say anything. He just gave it to him. He didn't comes home a few days later, and his wife knows he went to get the loan, and she's saying, we need to get some things to get started with Pesach. Can you? And he's hemming and hawing, not saying it, and Finally, he tells her what happened. So you know what her response was? Now, halachically, what did he have to give him? 10% of your, yeah, you have 10, you got to give 10%, right? She says, why'd you give him it all? Why'd you just give him half? Like, who thinks that way? This is during the war. You know how many people died in starvation in Russia during the war? You know how many people died? Forget about being killed. So many people died of starvation. And her response is, and why'd you give him anything? We need all the money, really. You know, listen, this was not extras, not extras in an iota. And her response is, why don't you just give him half? And who did he give it to? Someone he met for the first time, he doesn't even know him. That can only exist by a yid. And what is that? That's giving. So his response is, he doesn't know anybody. It's not possible he's going to get money. I'll be able to get more money. Not. Indeed, he was able to. When it came to America, paid up everybody, people money, he paid them. Yeah, that's generosity. And he didn't want to, and when he gave the money, he didn't give it to him in a way, he didn't tell him that that's everything I have. He didn't tell him that, right? But she wouldn't have then taken it, right? He wouldn't have done that. Yeah, he must be a wealthy guy or something. He was lucked out. He got a wealthy guy, right? That is an offering on the altar of God. What does it mean? What is true giving? When it ekes in you and it's not exactly what I want to do, it's not what gonna ring and make me feel great. And I do it. Speaking to myself. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right, folks. Any questions, any comments, any thoughts?
Quick question. I was wondering, I was been asking myself this question for a while.
Yes, go ahead.
Is there a good day, a specific day, which would be maybe the best day or a better day to give the 10% you were talking about? Like, is there a specific day in the week or any time which would make it the best way of giving?
Not on Shabbos.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay.
Is there if there's a specific need, then that's the great day. Otherwise, any day and every day, I mean, Tuesdays are special days because it says 2 times ki tov when God created the world. 2 times it was good. But if there was a need on Monday, you're going to wait till Tuesday? No. Right? So, all right, we'll talk further. All right, folks, I got to run. TRC coming up. Be well. God bless.